thank you for joining us. I'd like to make a special welcome to our Vice Chairman, and that's Batya Schmuckler. And thank you for joining us. And Batya will officially open the evening.
It's short and sweet. Firstly, thank you everybody on behalf of the Sharon Regional Committee of TELFED. Special welcome to Dr. Glassman from the WITS Alumni, and to Joel Shoot, who's come all the way from, well, we caught him here from Johannesburg. And it seems to be something really very interesting. We've got a lot in common. I'm also part of the WITS Alumni. Also from King David School, we've got back a long way. And the whole story about Janine is very interesting. It's quite close to my heart. I have a son who's serving in the army 5 minutes away from Janine right now. So I hope you all enjoy the evening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Batya.
Yeah, it's short and sweet.
My name's Doron, CEO of TELFED. It's very special that we could be here this evening. And it coincided with Joel's visit. Joel being a chanich of mine from years back at Santon Shul, and it's wonderful to have you here this evening, and thank you, Joel. And from the chanich of mine to the madrich of mine, there's Glassman, also at Santon Shul. So interesting connections here. I want to thank Netta. Netta is the head of volunteerism at TELFED, and our newest department at TELFED that deals with volunteerism and the regional committees. It's been a Sharon Regional Committee function. And it was Netta who really worked a lot behind the scenes to put everything together. Thank you to Talene for taking the funds. Talene has come to visit us, and to her Ima Nikki. We gather here this evening, just before Yom HaShoah, and even something like the Holocaust, which is so clear to us that it happened. And we meet survivors on a regular basis and hear their testimony, and something as huge as the Holocaust, people come and say, it didn't happen. And how truth can be perverted so easily. And if you say a lie often enough, then all of a sudden it's perceived as the truth. And that's why we're here this evening. Because Janine also falls, unfortunately, into that paradigm of that if you say a lie often enough, it's perceived as the truth. And therefore this evening we came to see and to hear, and hear firsthand from someone like Joel how he had to battle the perceptions that were in South Africa, and how a lie all of a sudden became an accepted truth. And we're going to see how a soldier himself just really couldn't take it and had to go out there and try his best to set the record straight. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the movie first. Afterwards, I'd like Les, after we see the movie, Les will take the floor, and then we'll introduce Joel. After Joel has spoken, there'll be time for questions from the floor, and I'm sure it's going to be very informative. Nikki, take a step out. I thanked you. No one saw you were. Here's Nikki from our fundraising department, Talene's mother. Thank you for joining us, Nikki. Okay, so we'll start now with the movie, and then afterwards Les will continue. Toda rabah. For your UN patience, and some very disturbing, very moving parts in that film. And I'd like to invite Dr. Glassman, who represents the WITS Alumni in Israel, who's our partner in organizing this evening. And Les, I'd like you to come up, please, and introduce Joel.
Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a bit heavy, but the truth shall prevail. It's the end of the movie, I must have note. I'd like to really thank Doron, and to congratulate Doron on being appointed CEO of TELFED. Doron was Machanich in Sandton, as well as Joel, and it's a great honor for me now that Machanich is the director and CEO of TELFED. I want to thank TELFED itself, an amazing organization. We're co-sponsoring WITS Alumni with TELFED, and this is the first of our official events. And I hope many more that people can really benefit from positive events that we hope to host in the future. In the audience tonight, and I really want to thank you all for coming out tonight, a special mention we have in our audience, Ambassador Arya Oded, who was the Israeli ambassador in Uganda and a few places, Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, Swaziland, Lesotho, Mauritius, and the Seychelles. And he was there from the 60s till about 94. So Arya, it's a pleasure to have you tonight, and we hope you'll have an association for the future as well. I'd also like to really mention that we have another exceptionally special guest tonight. Well, you all know Morris Ostrov. I can count as a very close friend. Morris, single-handedly, through his initial way, his correspondence with Richard Goldstone, also accused the army, accused Israel basically of war crimes and crimes against humanity. It was through the actions of Morris that he recanted. And it's a pleasure and honor to have Morris here in our audience tonight as well. Okay, now getting back to our guest speaker, Joel. I saw this video on Israeli TV. It was aired on Israeli TV a few years ago after what happened in Jenin. And then I saw Joel on TV, and I thought, wow, this is Machanich from Sandton. I was so honored. I went to Joburg, and I think the next day, as I arrived there, I phoned Joel, I got hold of him, I went to his offices, and I asked all my family and friends, did you know that Joel Shoup took the Star to court and he won the case? No one had heard of it. No one even knew that there was a court case against the Star. I thought, this is like incredible, how can this be? But Joel single-handedly as well, without any help from anyone, his own financial resources, he did the right thing. He looked for the emes, for the truth, and he took the Star to court and he actually won. And I think it's a great honor that TELFED, and that we're having tonight such an esteemed guest, somebody who single-handedly did the right thing for Israel and for the Jewish people. I'll hand over to Joel. And once again, thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll have many more joint ventures with WITS Alumni and TELFED.
Firstly, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, everyone who's coming here this evening. Unaccustomed to speaking in front of audiences other than on a court case that I do. It's a bit of a different forum. It's very gratifying to see Les and to see Doron, and things have come full circle. I still don't understand how I'm the one who came from the wrong state and I've lost all my hair, and you guys have got the good with your alien genes. Just to maybe speak about two of the cases that I have been involved in terms of Israel advocacy within South Africa, and some of my understanding of how the journalistic community works. And over the years, it's been 10 years since the Jenin documentary, what I've learned about how journalists think and how they work, and how as advocates for the state of Israel, we can actually better understand how the journalistic community works. So the first matter that I got involved in was the Phil Reeves article, and it obviously contained all the canards about the massacre, genocide, etc., ethnic cleansing. And Phil Reeves published a retraction of his own, and it was called "Sometimes Journalists Do Make Mistakes." What is very telling is that the same newspapers who actually printed the syndicated article were very slow to print the retraction, and his article saying sometimes journalists make mistakes. And that then alerted me to a principle within law, which is that never try to prove your own case, but see what is the other side saying and use their words against them. It's often called using the respondent's version, and the judge doesn't need to see who is telling the truth. He just looks at the one side, and if they've admitted, if they've made an admission, then you can win on that basis. So I wrote a letter to the Star with a bit of righteous indignation, which sometimes cannot be the right way to actually go, to just sometimes stick to the facts. And in South Africa we have a newspaper ombudsman, which is in a certain sense an arbiter within the journalistic community to see that newspaper reporting is free and fair. So I try to use that code of conduct against the Star, which was run by the Independent Newspaper Group, and say that this article which had been published was just one-sided, was inaccurate, and above all, the facts were incorrect. But as they say, never let the facts get in the way of a good argument. They printed the story and they stuck to their story, and they didn't print for readers a retraction. I then decided to take it a bit legal. But in South Africa, when any type of legal jurisdiction, you need a plaintiff. And I didn't have a plaintiff, so who was I really going to sue? Who was going to be the plaintiff? So I don't even recall how it actually happened, but I got in touch with this guy, Jonathan Van Caspel. I think he had written an article, and this was before the documentary was made. And I said, look, you have a legal personality in South Africa, but let me just go with it. Because even though we might lose the case, at the very least, that they have to put their version forward. And they have to say, they could raise a certain technical plea and say that the plaintiff doesn't live in South Africa, you're suing for defamation, but how has he been damaged? He has no reputation in South Africa in the first place. But be that as it may, they would still have had to have answered the matter in legal papers, which is a matter of public record. And I wanted to see what they would have said in order to maybe name and shame. But it didn't actually have to go that far, because in the course of the legal correspondence, what actually happened is that the Star did retract, and they published a page 2 retraction. But it didn't end there, because a few weeks later, the Americans were involved in Iraq in the Fallujah episode. And in reporting on Fallujah, as a passing comment in the Star, they said, this was a massacre very similar to what the Israelis did in Jenin. And they just printed the retraction. So it was almost like sending the same letter to the Star again, and 2 weeks later they printed the second retraction saying that there was no massacre within Jenin. My other exposure was a TV documentary by far left-wing TV journalist by the name of Mr. John Pulger. Now, he's so far left-wing, obviously these are the type of documentaries which would never see the light of day in any TV network news program. But these are the type of TV documentaries that would be shown at a university campus, a Palestine Solidarity Committee type of thing. And obviously coming from almost like a Trotskyite left-wing Marxist worldview. But South Africa, maybe even today, but even then less so, was a bit unsophisticated in terms of the nuances of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there was a new TV station at the time, ETV, and there was a print journalist who had made the jump into TV journalism. And she had no political experience, certainly no international political experience, but she wanted to brand herself as this investigative reporter and, actually report on the hard-hitting international stories. So she got hold of the John Pulger documentary and she was going to show it, and it was publicized a lot, maybe for about 2 weeks before the flight on TV. It was obviously very one-sided, it had no type of balance. And in South Africa we have a journalistic commission called the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, which from an American point of view would be anti-First Amendment rights, because it does curtail freedom of speech, and it says that everything has to be free and fair, it has to be balanced, etc. Now, in the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, I don't think that I've seen a single case where the Broadcasting Complaints Commission Tribunal has voted in favour of a complainant against a TV station, because obviously that will set a precedent and will open the floodgates for these type of complaints. But they have to be seen to pay lip service to the idea that they do take complaints seriously. So they do bend over backwards in favour of the TV stations, and I haven't seen a single judgment. I haven't been really following it in the last few years, but I haven't seen a single judgment where they've voted or they've actually ruled in favour of a complainant. But what we wanted to do in that complaint was to just test the waters and to, even if we did lose, to take ETV to the full course of that process and to see what would their defence be, what would their response be. And it was very interesting. They engaged probably the most eminent South African advocate in terms of constitutional law and media law. It was a senior counsel. They got one of the large law firms to represent them, and it was quite high profile. Some of the other the other TV networks actually covered it, and they spent many hundreds of thousands of rands on their legal defence. The BCCSA ruled in their favour, but I did get a concession from the TV station at the time that if they were going to report on this issue in the future, that they would balance it by showing a TV documentary in order to cover the Israeli perspective. Obviously, in the last 10 years, as far as I've seen, they haven't actually aired a single documentary or any feature on the Arab-Israeli conflict because they don't want to show the more balanced Israel view. So they've actually steered clear of the issue completely, which I think in a certain sense is a bit of a victory. But what that incident really showed me was how the South African journalistic community, and maybe worldwide, actually reacts to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there was very little context from which they were coming from. And the same journalist who aired the John Pilger documentary, a few weeks before the BCSA hearing, she didn't know who I was at the time, she was asked to speak at a Jewish event in order to speak about her experiences as a South African journalist. She had quite a high profile. She had written a story about a certain kidnapping, and 10 years later she had found this child, and she became quite prominent, and that was before she had gone into TV news. So they asked her to speak at this shul event, and I went there, and obviously everyone knew that this BCCA hearing was going to be coming up in the next few weeks, so quite a few people were in the audience, waiting to ask her a few loaded questions about why did she flight this very, almost like very biased type of documentary. So I stood up in the audience and I asked her, and she was speaking now about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I asked a bit of a loaded question. I said, for those of us who'd like to understand more about the Arab-Israeli conflict, could you maybe recommend one or two good books that you've read on the subject, which maybe we could read as well? And she didn't have an answer. She'd obviously not read a single book. And the silence got louder and louder, and people started to laugh. That was a journalist who was really portraying herself as being so well versed on the subject, and she, by her own admission, hadn't read a single book. It then got a bit comical because her boyfriend at the time stood up in the audience and turned around to me, asking the question, and said, "Can you name me a book that you've read?" As if it was an unfair question. I named a few good books, actually back to him, and that was it. Later on in the evening, she actually came back to the question, and she said, "Well, I actually, now that I think about that other question, that there is a good book that I've read." And she named the book, and it was by Robert Fisk, which engendered even more of a laugh. And that really opened the curtain to me understanding a bit more within the South African context, and as I say, maybe even on the broad international scene, of how journalists operate within the political sphere. Many of them study journalism, but they don't study history or political science, and they might be good writers, and they cut their teeth in other forms of within the journalistic arena, and then they get onto political journalism, and they get the talking points, but something pivotal really changes in terms of how they see the good story. And to divorce it from the political aspect, in the last 10 years, there's been some very interesting psychological research in the nature of how people perceive conflict. And that's what I'd like to speak about as at the final leg of this evening's talk, is that the rubric of right and wrong has been replaced by the underdog and the oppressor. And it's almost a dogma which has been termed as the underdogma. People feel good in supporting the underdog. And it's a cultural meme that is so natural to us, from watching a movie, say like Rocky, or these rags to riches type of movies, but also from a human developmental point of view. Everyone was a child. Everyone was an underdog at some time of their life. They were in nursery school, and they were in junior school, and they had teachers, and they had authority figures. So everyone instinctively, from a very deep aspect of their psyche, can relate to the underdog. And we feel very compassionate when we root for the underdog. Now, historically, Jews were seen as the underdog. So, to a certain extent, nothing has changed. The world journalistic community is still supporting the underdog. It was just 50 years ago, the Jews were the underdog, and now they are consistent with that line of thinking. It's just that another party has become the underdog. And what's very interesting, just got a few talking points here about how this underdogma really exposes itself within the journalistic community. You can just bear with me for a moment. So if we can just try to really define what underdogma is that it's the belief that those who have less power are virtuous because they have less power. Not because of the facts or the context or the broader historical context, but because they have less power. And those who have more power are in the wrong because they have power. And often that is why people are anti-American or anti-Israeli. Because it's now just an identification with who has less power and who has more power. And this also now explains why within the Palestinian conflict you have university students or journalists who have nothing in common with the Palestinian cause, but yet they support the Palestinian cause. The Palestinians are anti-women's rights, anti-gay, anti-free speech, any type of like Western value. And the Israelis are more synonymous with those Western values. But why does the journalistic community side with the Palestinian side? Because of underdogma. Because the facts are irrelevant. It's a visceral, psychological identification. So just bear with me. Now, what's very interesting is that there's been some interesting research into this field of underdogma. And the University of South Florida conducted some research amongst political science students. And they were asked to write an essay on world conflicts. But there was a bit of a catch. They redrew the maps of all of these conflicts with the aggressor country being smaller in size than the underdog. And they asked the students to please comment who is the aggressor in this certain conflict. And just because the size of the countries were redrawn on this map, it influenced people. These students, who were political science students, they weren't ignorant, but just seeing it on a map of who's bigger and who's smaller influenced their assessment of who is right and wrong in that conflict. So sometimes when we are engaged in Israel advocacy, is that we want to throw our arms up and say, but you don't know the facts. This is wrong because we've got this report, but it's irrelevant. Because within that arena, they aren't looking at the facts. They have this visceral identification with the whole underdog motif, and we have to address that on its own terms. So, if I can take it back to my experiences in the media, fighting the media in South Africa, what I have learned, and maybe I can put it into practice in the future, is to put the brake on almost like the righteous indignation, and to say this is anti-Semitic, this is this is factually incorrect. That may be so, but to redraw the debate into saying who's the underdog here, and who is the oppressor, and to hammer away at the facts of saying, like we saw in the documentary, when a person from Amnesty International was cornered and saying, but aren't suicide bombers also engaged in war crimes? And the only type of response that you could engage in was such a flimsy technical response. Well, they're not, sanctioned by the state. But on a moral level, she didn't have anything to say. And I think that in engaging in this type of advocacy on behalf of Israel, is that we really have to hammer away at that very visceral response within the journalistic arena and say that we do have the moral high ground, factually, historically, within context, but also that we are the underdogs in terms of the onslaught of Arab terrorism, world agendas, like a genocidal tendency from Iran, the nuclear threat, etc., and to redraw the battle lines without so much of the righteous indignation, but beating them at their own game. Thank you very much.
John, could you take maybe just a few questions? If you could introduce yourself as some need less introduction. Now let's introduce yourself please and you ask your question.
Well, private question, if I may make a statement. First of all, thank you very much for this film. Congratulations on providing a tremendous amount of research and valuable information. But if you'll forgive me for being the devil's advocate, I don't think anybody who is not already pro-Israel would have the patience to sit through this long film and concentrate on it and understand the various arguments. I think one loses what the message is. However, I would like to suggest that if we broke it up into 7 or 8 or even more short films, each with a powerful message at the end, emphasizing the aspects of media bias, the violation of journalistic ethics, it would have the advantage not only of being short enough for people to concentrate, but repetition would keep on giving that message of media bias, which is so important. Thank you, anyhow.
Well, I was not involved in the making of the documentary. I was just interviewed very briefly for it. So, but I do actually agree with you that we have to stay on point, and maybe the shorter segments would actually be a lot more powerful in terms of just getting the message through.
Sorry, yeah. Just a brief question. Who so far actually have been exposed to this movie? I mean, we've now seen it for the first time. Has it been shown on any TV networks?
It was Channel 1.
Ah.
Channel 1.
A Canadian production, so it was, I think, shown on quite a lot of TV networks throughout the world. It was the largest TV network in Canada that actually produced it, so I think it was on quite a few international TV networks. It was on Israeli TV, and they made a DVD about it, so I think it has been extensively seen.
I thought that the film was really excellent. As Mr. said, a little long, but that's okay. What was missing for me, in light of how you want other people who are not naturally pro-Israel, was the beginning should have started with the suicide bombings. They should have seen scenes from a lot of the bombings. And for instance, the one at the Dolphinarium, where there were all children that were attacked in one night. All that sort of thing should have been an introduction as to why we went into Geneva. That's something that was unfortunately missing, because that would have given the people immediately some food for thought.
It's an excellent question. What I've found, and I'm not part of the journalistic community, but what I have found is that when TV stations are looking for documentaries, that the first thing that they have to ask themselves is this a propaganda piece, or what can be perceived as a propaganda piece, or is it objective? And from an Israeli point of view, we might think that it's not hard-hitting enough. But in order for it to actually go onto a network station and be flighted, that it can't be too overwhelmingly pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. So they have to show, maybe water things down and not be too emotional about certain issues. I don't know if that's the right word, but they have to water certain issues down and maybe not emphasize certain other facts, because then it will be perceived as being too biased to one particular situation, one particular viewpoint, and then it's not going to get onto the TV network.
Would you say that the BDS and similar movements in South Africa are winning the war against the Jews in Israel?
The short answer is I don't know. I'm not really involved in that field actually intensely enough to answer the question. I think it really depends where you stand. If you're a student, I think you see it a lot more intensely within the campus. But it's like living in Israel. Things still carry on, and when you're on the ground, you don't perceive things the same as when you're 10,000 miles away and you see it from the vantage point of a newspaper headline. So when you're in South Africa, you don't perceive it as being under siege, or that Israel is just being maligned all the time. But I think it all depends where you stand.
So Joel, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it.